Hey you guys, it's Krystal. I have been promising on my Facebook group about starting to film some cooking on a budget videos or some basic videos, basically putting stuff together that's cheap meals or snacks, or just trying to figure out what to do with all of the random things that we sometimes get free with rebate apps and stuff. So I have been putting it off for a little bit. But I wanted to do it as part of my Live Off Your Stockpile challenge, one of my goals that was in there. And so here we are. I'm going to film on how to make Pullman Sandwich Bread. And if you're not familiar with that, it's just a softer sandwich bread that's baked in this type of pan. It's called a Pullman because you bake it with the lid on. So you pull this on and off. Bake it with the lid on, and it actually creates a very soft, yummy, square bread that you can use for sandwiches or grilled cheese or whatever. There's also a French term for it. I don't know. I don't speak French. I don't know how it's pronounced, but that's what we're going to make today. So this is my first time ever, period, making bread of any kind in a stand mixer. I've always done it by hand. If you don't have a stand mixer, just knead accordingly to the instructions that I'm going to go through. I have my recipe here. I have all my ingredients measured out to make it easy for us. I have warmed up my milk to save some time. The recipe says to warm your milk up to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit and then put the yeast and sugar and egg in it and stir. So we won't have to wait too long to proof our yeast because I'm using instant yeast. Let me go ahead and put this in while I talk about it. I'm just adding that to my milk, which is 1.5 cups, and again I'll go through this stuff here shortly. Let's see, and 1 egg, and then we're going to stir. So I'm going to add my egg and splash a little bit because if you know anything about me, I guess I cannot cook in a kitchen without making a mess. That's why you should always have like a towel or a wash rag. Just makes your life easier in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and stir this yeast and sugar and actually an egg. I forgot my sugar. So 1 tablespoon. I don't know how this will work exactly. I'm using monk fruit. We don't really have sugar in my house. We use monk fruit. It's just like natural sugar alcohol from different fruits. So this will be sugar-free, but it should be okay. So I'm just going to mix this, see what happens. But because it is instant yeast, you shouldn't have to proof it. I don't know why this is getting a little clumpy. But yeah, so we'll let that sit and I'll start telling you about the recipe. In the meantime, hopefully that starts to bubble as yeast usually does. Our ingredients that we have are 1.5 cups of milk that we warmed to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. If you don't have a like candy thermometer, here's what I use. I think you can get them pretty cheap anymore. You could probably use a regular like a meat thermometer or whatever. About 110. You don't want to get it too hot because then it kills the yeast. You don't want it too cold because then it doesn't activate the yeast or it takes a very long time. So we warmed this to about 110. You can also, if you don't have any thermometer, what I did was put my milk in the microwave, in a microwavable thing, for 45 seconds and stirred it around, and then it wasn't as hot, so I put it in for another minute, and then that was it. So I think my oven is like 1,000 watts or 1,100 watts. The time might vary depending on your microwave, but anyway, that's what I did if you don't have a thermometer to check the temperature. So 1.5 cups of milk that I warmed. Let's see, 1 large egg, which I already put in here. We have 4 tablespoons of room temperature butter. It doesn't really look like that much, but it's 4 tablespoons, which is also 1/4 cup. If you're ever wondering, or half a stick of butter. 1 egg, I already said that. 2 1/4 teaspoons of instant yeast. If you buy your yeast in bulk, that would be a good measurement. Usually the recipes call for 1 packet, and you're like, okay, well, it's much cheaper to buy in bulk, like a container instead of single packets. How much is that? Well, 1 packet of yeast equals 2 1/4 tablespoons. I'm sorry, 2 1/4 teaspoons. So if you have these packets, 1 packet is 2 1/4 teaspoons. If you don't have these packets, just measure 1 1/4 teaspoons from your bulk container. So I hope that helps. For this recipe, you can use instant or active. It doesn't really matter. So yes, there's that. 1 tablespoon sugar. Sugar is recommended because the yeast feeds off of the sugar. Like I said, I only have monk fruit. We don't have sugar. So I'm hoping that this will work. I've baked muffins and such using like stevia and monk fruit in the past and had no issues. Never tried bread yet with monk fruit. So we're gonna see. Hopefully, because it's instant yeast, maybe it will work. If you've ever done this before, comment below. Let me know any good stories, bad stories, any comments or advice, because I'm still new learning to do experiments with different breads. There was 1.5 actually teaspoons of salt and 4 cups of all-purpose flour, plus like a 1/4 cup or a 1/2 cup on your workstation or whatever. I didn't measure it, I just put some stuff. So far, we're gonna mix our dough in this KitchenAid mixer bowl, and then we're gonna plop it onto the surface. So I just already have the flour there. I do have my container of all-purpose flour here if we need a little bit more. So I just have that there. Just be ready if you need more. Like I said, I didn't measure the extra, but I know this is for wet ingredients, this measuring cup, but it'll just be easier to dump it in there. And then what I did, because you don't want to mix the salt with your yeast, because then it could have some issues. What I did was just put the salt on top of the flour, and this is going to go in the mixing cup first. Okay, so I'm just checking. My yeast is still clumpy. I'm just going to say a prayer and hope that this is going to be okay. So yeah, about 4.5 or 4 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, but only 4 cups is going to go into the dough itself, what we'll be putting in the mixture. So the instructions on this recipe: warm the milk to 110, add the yeast, sugar, and egg, stir aside, and let sit for about 5 minutes. In the stand mixer with the dough hook, add the flour, mix in the salt, and then add the yeast mixture. So I'm going to I already added the salt with the flour. I'm just going to put it all in here. Just run it slow. I have the 7-quart KitchenAid mixer, so I actually have a soft start option. The smaller ones don't. I don't know why. It makes no sense. But anyway, I'm just going to put it on the small start option, so that it can just mix the flour and the salt just a little bit. And before I add the yeast mixture, I don't think it's been 5 minutes, but I'm starting to see some bubbles. So while we're waiting on the yeast, I'll just run down. You can fast forward if you don't want to hear all these instructions. Sometimes it helps because you can pause this while you're watching, pause it, and just write down the steps. So after we add the flour and the salt and the yeast mixture, we're going to knead on medium for 1 minute, scraping the sides if we need to. Once the flour is incorporated, we're going to knead the dough on medium again until everything's smooth. And this dough, because it's going to be a sandwich loaf, those type of bread doughs are actually very sticky and such when you're making it. So if you're like me and you're like, kind of obsessive in all of the steps, you're like, the dough is too sticky, I need to add more flour, which in typical recipes would be the case. If it's too sticky, add flour and it'll be okay. Usually it doesn't really matter that much. Because this is a sandwich bread, it just needs to be a little bit different when it bakes. We want it softer. We don't want like a dense, hard, or heavily crusted bread. So resist the urge to add extra flour. I'm saying that like I'm not preaching to the choir, like I'm preaching to myself as well, because I have that compulsion, like it doesn't look right now, I'm gonna add flour, but I was told not to do that. The dough will be soft and sticky, and that's okay, that's what it's supposed to be. Once we knead that for an additional 3 more minutes, we're gonna add the room temperature butter, which I have here, 4 tablespoons. Let's see, a little bit at a time. It doesn't seem that much. Maybe I'll just do like 2 or 3 little scoops in there as the thing is still going. Once you've finished adding all of the butter, knead 2 more minutes until it's smooth and elastic but still soft. Then we're gonna plop the dough onto the counter that's already been floured, shape it into a ball, and then we're gonna put the ball into an oiled bowl and cover with plastic wrap, which I didn't get that prepared, so we'll just do that together. Leave in a warm place for an hour or until it's doubled. You can put it on your counter, like in a corner if there's a spot that's more warm, by an open window, or you can put it in your oven. Just close the door or put it in your oven with the oven light on, which I may do so that I don't forget about this in an hour. In about an hour, once the dough has about doubled in size, we're going to put it back on a floured surface, and you can either divide this dough into 2 separate things to make 2 smaller Pullman bread loaves, but what I have is like a 13 point something inch long by 4 by 4, I think, pan, and so this recipe makes one of these giant loaf pans or 2 smaller ones. So you can divide at that time. Once it's risen by double, you can put it back on the counter, cut it in 2, and move forward, or just use 1. So I'm just going to make 1 loaf with this today, and then you just kind of form it, make it a dough, go on the outsides, like of the ball, flatten it a little, go roll the outsides towards the insides, crimp the seam, and I always put the seam side down in the dough pan. Once you do that, you'll cover with plastic wrap again, put it in a warm place for about 45 minutes until it is about 2 inches from the rim. So you don't want to let this rise all the way to the top, because then we're going to put a lid on it and bake it, and you don't want it to, you know, like ruin your pan. The bread needs more room to rise as it bakes. So when it's about probably to here or so, we'll put the lid on it, I believe, and then we'll put it in the hot oven. So at some point, let's see, halfway through us rising the dough, we will preheat the oven. It says, this recipe says 380, I think because my oven actually caught fire on Thanksgiving, like the temperature regulator went bad and like the circuit board caught fire because it got too hot. This new oven that we're using right now bakes a little hot, so I'm just erring on the side of caution. Me personally, I'm probably gonna do like 355 degrees, and if I have to bake it longer, I have to bake it longer, but I don't want to ruin this bread loaf, and so I'm gonna bake it lower. But if you want to follow this recipe, the recipe does say 380 degrees. I think that is a little high. Generally, it's like 375 to 350 to 375. You can decide, your kitchen, your rules. I'm gonna bake it at 355, which is probably like 365 with or 345 or so. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out this oven. Do what works for you. So we'll preheat that when it's like halfway risen, so that it'll be hot when we need to put it in the oven. Bake about, if you're gonna do 2 small loaves, bake about 30 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes. Like I said, I'm doing a small loaf, so I'm gonna bake it for about 45 minutes. And then we'll partially open the lid to let it cool for about 10 minutes, remove it, let it cool completely. If you wrap it in like a clean kitchen towel, it'll help like steam the bread, and it'll keep it like really soft as it's cooling down. And so I think we're gonna do that. And then definitely wait at least an hour. 2 hours would be best. You don't want to cut the bread too soon because there's still steam and heat inside the bread, and so slicing the bread because you're so excited and you just made a brand new loaf, could really be detrimental to like the texture, the taste. Maybe it's a little doughy, and then it'll get hard soon because it was just cut too soon. So wait for it to cool at least 1 hour. 2 hours would be ideal before slicing it open because, like I said, that steam will stay in there. It creates them nice little pockets in bread that make it so yummy. So I'm probably going to wait 2 hours to cut mine. And that's it. So most people say, everybody says something different for your bread. If you want to keep it in your fridge, you can. A lot of people recommend that because homemade bread doesn't have all the preservatives and stuff in it that allow it to sit at room temperature for weeks. Now we're seeing months on end. Some of the like honey wheat breads and stuff are lasting for months before going bad. Homemade bread doesn't have that. So if you leave it on the counter, it'll probably last 4 to 5 days. After 5 days, you might see some mold or the texture changing or smelling. So just use common sense for that. If you think it's bad, you know, just try to use it within the first 4 to 5 days left at room temperature on your counter. If you put it in your fridge, it could last up to 2 weeks. But I found at 2 weeks in the fridge, it's just dry and hard and not pleasant. Like it kind of defeats the whole purpose of making homemade bread because you don't have that like soft yumminess. So if you want to put it in the fridge, just put it in an airtight container and try to use it within like the first 7 to 10 days. And just understand you'll probably need some like jelly or butter. Like if you're doing French toast or regular toast or different things like that, toasted cheese, like grilled cheese sandwiches, that would be okay because you're already, like you're not wanting that soft, chewy bread to bite into. So to each their own. And you can also freeze this if you make some and you only want to eat one loaf and freeze the other one or eat half of it. You can pop it in your freezer in an airtight bag for a couple months. So I've had bread in my freezer for probably up to 6 months, and it was still okay to eat, but after 3 months, it just starts to get, you know, a little harder in spots, or it doesn't kind of taste like, it's just not soft. So to each their own. Again, your kitchen, your rules, you decide what to do. So we have some minimal bubbling. You'll probably see more bubbling in yours because your yeast won't be coming out of the freezer in this last minute decision to film, and also you'll be using sugar. So I'm just going to not touch that actually. Okay, so here is my KitchenAid mixer. What I'm going to do is add the flour and the salt, which again, like I said, I put it all together. So I'm just going to attempt to not make a bigger mess. Honestly, I only dusted this with flour already because as I was measuring, I spilled some. It happens. Somebody I watch on YouTube has a sign in their kitchen that says, "Messy kitchens are a sign of happiness." I thought that was pretty cool because my kitchen's usually a mess, but that means that I'm cooking or baking or whatever. Got all the things going on. So in here, I have 4 cups of all-purpose flour and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. So I'm just going to put on this, I got to pull it up. I'm still fairly new to this, so if you see me like fumbling, I've only used this a few times so far for some cookies and pastas and stuff using my pasta attachments. So I'm still new to this. Let me make sure. My GFI tripped, I think. There we go. So I'm just going to let this incorporate the salt a little bit with the flour. You don't have to do that. Like I said, I just like to be a little thorough. I don't want my yeast to touch the salt. I don't even know the scientific reason. I just know that you don't mix salt with yeast. So I'm just going to have this work a little bit. And I really like these bigger ones because they have the higher horsepower. So the motor is all metal. It's just different when it's spinning. It's not like incredibly loud. So I know it'll get louder because I'm going to raise the setting to medium here shortly because I'm about to add the yeast. So I'll go ahead and do this now. Just do it slow so it has time to incorporate. I'm gonna go up to setting. Just a tip, I would, had I thought about it, I would do this differently. If you freeze your yeast, because your yeast can basically last forever if you do keep it in the freezer, bring it to room temperature or take it out of the freezer the night before or something. I think that will avoid any clumping and you'll get a better reaction with the warm milk. I did not think that far ahead, and I wanted to get this filmed for the weekend, the first weekend in April. Okay, so here we are. I'm gonna probably need to scrape the sides. I'm gonna lower it a little bit just so I don't cause a giant mess. So I have it on about medium. Do this for a minute, at least until the flour is incorporated. And because it's the dough hook is not as large as the whisk or the paddle attachment, so the dough hook will need a little encouragement. Like you will have to scrape the sides. With the paddle attachment, I don't know if I ever had to scrape the sides. And the whisk attachment, I don't think I did either. So, but because this is just a smaller attachment, you'll need a little help getting this along. So we might need a couple minutes for this stage. We're gonna find out. Starting to grab mostly. Smells like bread. Can you guys see this? Really close. I'm going to scrape the side one last time, I think, and then we'll be able to go on to the next step. Yeah. Okay, get that going. I'm at a 4 right now. Okay. Flour's incorporated. Now we're going to knead the dough for about 3 minutes, medium until smooth. Once it's smooth, we will add the butter a little bit at a time. I'm not going to stop to explain that. You'll just see when I start adding that. So I'll go ahead, put it back on medium, and let the dough hook do what the dough hook does. Okay, now that we have kneaded it, did all the situation with the butter, while that was going, I went ahead and washed a bowl and just spread some oil in it, because we're going to take this out, put it on here, shape it into a ball, and then put it into an oiled bowl to double in size. So I got that going because I didn't prepare in advance. So Now we are going to remove the dough, shape it into a ball, put it in the bowl. Okay. Let's see how this goes. Might need some flexible scrapers if you have them. That would come in handy. I just let this go. As you can see, it is elastic and it is sticky. So this isn't the fun part for me, but if you like getting your hands dirty, you might enjoy this. So let's get this out. Could use a spatula for some extra help. Or if you have them flexible, like dough scrapers, again, that would be a big help. But, of course, I don't have one. So we will plop this. We don't want to work it. We just want to dump it. So we'll do our best, then kind of let gravity help us out a bit. Soft and sticky. Don't add flour. This is what we're supposed to go for. When you have doughs that are like this, they're going to bake up to be better, softer loaves. The ones that are a little more, like if you put this out, added more flour, mixed it in, shaped it into a ball, it's going to be more of a crusty bread, which is a little bit harder. So I'm just going to get out some of these remnants. We don't want any hard crusty bread today. We want Pullman Sandwich Bread. So, soft and sticky. Does anyone actually like this part? If you like this part, comment down below, because I need to know if anyone enjoys the sticky part. So I'm going to wash my hands. Or no, I'm not. I'm going to shape this into a ball the best I can. Again, this is why we have the flour. Dough doesn't really stick to flour much. So we're going to shape it into a ball that's ball-esque, and then plop it into our oiled bowl. Okay, shape it. Gross. Plop. It's in a ball. It's about as close as it's gonna get for me. Okay, we put it in there. I'm gonna wash my hands, get this covered up with plastic wrap, and move on. Okay, we need some plastic wrap. You don't have to use a bowl this big. Just make sure that it can handle about twice the size of the dough that you're making. This I had ready because we just did a couple birthday parties for some family members. excuse me, which is why we have still some bowls and baking things over there that need attended to. So you can set this on your counter. My house is about 71 degrees, which is fairly warm, depending on who you ask. So I could leave this on the counter for about an hour. I think I'm going to put it in my oven with the light on so it can rise for about an hour. I'll just check on it periodically and make sure it doubles in size. So this is what it looks like before. It's just sitting there in some oil. And then while you're waiting up for an hour or 45 minutes or an hour and 10, however long it takes for this to double in size, you can clean up your mess, run the dishwasher, or whatever, go sit and read a book, whatever floats your boat. So that's it for this, and I'm going to get this to rise, and I'll be back when the next step, time for the next step, which we'll put it in our Pullman pans, which is what we're making, Pullman sandwich loaf. Okay, see you then. Okay guys, my bread was sitting in my oven under the oven light for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then I removed it from the oven, set it on top of the oven, so like the stove top, and then for the rest, you know, about 15-20 more minutes while I had my oven preheating. So I had told you before, I think I said I was going to do 355. I ended up preheating my oven to 360 degrees. Like I said before, the recipe does say 380 degrees. I think that's a little excessive. My 360 could be 360 or could be 365 in a regular oven. You make those decisions and change according to how your oven bakes. Anyways, while that 45 minutes was going on, it's sitting there and rising again. It actually has doubled in size again, and surprisingly, there is plenty. There's just about 2 inches. There's more, obviously, on these sides in here because the loaf kind of goes up in the middle. But the main thing is to keep 2 inches here because we're going to cover this with our pan lid, which is why it's called a Pullman. Let's see if I can do this on my first try. Okay, we're going to cover it like this. Our bread is going to bake with the lid on. That's how it's going to make it to be like a square loaf. So we're going to bake it just like this. I had sprayed with cooking spray on the inside of this pan before I put the bread in there, and also I sprayed the lid, like the downside of this lid, just to make sure when we take it out of the oven in about 45, I think I might check it at 40 minutes just because it's a higher temperature, but the recipe says 45 to 50 minutes. Once that comes time, I'll take it out of the oven, and I want this to be able to open it, like crack it like this, maybe a little more, just to start the cooling process for about 10 minutes. And so I went ahead and greased the other side of this lid just so that, you know, just to eliminate any possibility of it sticking and maybe not allowing me to open it as easily as this. Okay, I'm going to put the lid on and pop it in the oven for, I'm going to check in about 40 minutes and we'll see what happens. All right. Okay, so the bread was in the oven for 40 minutes before I checked it. When I checked it at 40 minutes, a toothpick went in and came out clean. It was baked. So I took it out of the oven, shut my oven off, which I did keep at 360 degrees. What I did for the first 10 minutes of it cooling, I opened the pan about this much and let it cool like this for about 10 minutes just to have some steam escape, but still keep cooking the bread just a little bit longer in that warm air on top of the stove. So not in the oven anymore. Turned my oven off. It baked for 40 minutes and was done. Cooled for 10 minutes like this. And then after 10 minutes, I took off the lid, which didn't stick. You'll see here in a moment. My bread did not reach the lid all the way this time for a couple reasons, but I'll go over them in a moment. But what I did was put a cooling rack on top of this and then just flipped it upside down, and my bread loaf came out super easy, like just popped right out because I sprayed it with nonstick spray. My bread loaf, then I set it on my counter, put a clean kitchen towel. Actually, I had 2 because they were smaller. Clean kitchen towels over top of it so it would kind of trap the steam a little bit longer while the bread was cooling, and then it just makes it for like a softer, like squishy kind of bread. And this is it. So this is my loaf of bread. You can maybe see it's soft and squishy. It's not like your typical super hard crusty bread. So that's cool. If you can't tell, I'll put up the pan and the loaf so you can tell it did not raise all the way to the top. Generally this would be a big square loaf, hence the type of pan. This is a Pullman because you pull on and off the lid, I guess. I don't know. It's called a Pullman pan to make square bread loaves. My bread did not rise enough to create a square loaf, but you can still use this for French toast and grilled cheese and just toast with butter or peanut butter and jelly, whatever floats your boat. You can, if whatever's left over after like 5 days or so, or if you had to keep it in the fridge for a week or two and it kind of got hard, you can definitely make this into homemade breadcrumbs with what you have left so you don't have to throw it away. Couple reasons why this might not have risen as much. In the beginning of this video, I showed you the yeast that I used and showed you what it looked like in the warm milk that we had heated to about 110. Mine did go over the temperature a little bit, but I made sure it wasn't too high. After 140 degrees and higher, that temperature is too hot for the yeast. It will actually kill the yeast, so it won't be active and rise, etc. Anyway, I noticed when I showed you guys what my yeast looked like in the milk mixture with the egg and the sugar, it wasn't bubbling like it should. So what you want to look for is kind of like if you ever been to the ocean and like the waves are like crashing on like the beach on the sand, and there's like that foamy stuff on top. That's typically, I know that sounds really weird, but that's typically what your yeast will look like as it's proofing and stuff. Also, like if you ever had a coffee, like a macchiato or something, and you went to pour it into a different cup and there's some foam still left in the original cup, that's kind of that. It's like a foamy, light, airy foam is what you would usually expect. My yeast didn't even separate. It was clumpy. So I had a feeling it wasn't going to be 100% perfect anyway from the get. But a couple things. My yeast was in the freezer. I always keep my yeast in the freezer because it'll last forever. It was older, but it's been in the freezer, so it should last a long time. Just keep them things in mind when you do more baking. Let it come to room temperature. I should have taken it out earlier or yesterday, whatever, and I did not. So keep that in mind. Another thing, I did not use sugar. Yeast feeds on sugar. Sugar alternatives are not it for yeast. They can't feed on it and grow and whatever yeast does, which is why they say not to ever bake with sugar alternatives. I used monk fruit because we don't have sugar in my house, so that could be a reason. If you use regular sugar, maybe you'll get that square thing. I think that was it. Possibly could have overworked it, not let it rise enough on its first or second. It definitely could have gone longer. I was just super excited for these new pans because I ordered them on Amazon and haven't used them yet. So whenever the 1 hour mark happened for the first rise, I checked it and it was good enough for me. And then after 45 minutes of letting it rise in here, checked it, it was good enough for me, and proceeded to the next step as well. So I could have let it rise a lot longer. A bunch of factors go into making bread. So actually I'm kind of excited that it happened this way this time, because it's important to know when making bread, you'll almost never have almost dropped it. You'll almost never have the same loaf of bread twice because it's baking. So maybe your flour was a little heavier today than it will be next time. The humidity, like if it's hot, cold, like humid, whatever, that plays into how bread comes together, how it rises, bakes, etc. Your altitude, different things. Bread is very tricky. But it still smells like bread. I'm going to taste it in a moment. I'm sure it'll still taste like bread. But like I said, just give yourself some grace if it doesn't come out perfect the very first time. Keep doing it because it's still going to come out good most of the time. If it doesn't, try it again. It's still super cheap. It's like, I mean, this cost, I used clearance flour. The egg was super cheap. The milk was super cheap. I coupon, obviously, if you've been with this channel for any length of time, I coupon and get a lot of my groceries for free. So this is much cheaper than buying bread at the store. So if you have to try 2 or 3 times to get like the perfect loaf that you like, that's perfectly fine. It's never gonna be the same loaf twice. Like I said, so many factors go into it. So give yourself some grace and just keep baking with it. Okay, yay! So this, I just cut open a piece. See how it's squishy? It has all of these pockets, which are super important. One, to not over bake it, and then also doing the steam, like letting it cool with the lid cracked for 10 minutes, and letting it cool once it's out of the pan on a rack, but in a kitchen towel. It will help you steam. So it looks like sandwich bread. I'm gonna go ahead and try it. Yeah, that's bread. See how it's soft and squishy? I have not been able to make a loaf of bread this soft just yet. I've made a lot of crusty breads because they were no-knead breads and I didn't have a mixer until recently. But none were this good. Yeah, it tastes like bread. It's super yummy, guys. Yeah, I would recommend this. I will put the recipe, I don't know why it's not focusing. I will put the recipe to this bread in the description box if you want to follow that. I did go through and read it in the beginning and then step by step as I went. Also, you can see the crust here. It's just a little bit on the edges. So this is a corner, so it's going to be a little thicker, but yeah, super soft, super yummy. Be great for sandwiches, amazing for thicker slices like these for French toast. Let it soak in the egg a little bit before you make it. It is really good. So I hope this helped you. Let me know if you're going to make this or you have any suggestions or something that maybe I did not mention in the while I was sharing about why this might have risen. If you know of another reason why maybe I didn't rise as much, please let me know in the comments below. And yeah, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and I hope to see you back on this channel. Alright, thanks for watching. Bye.